We'll open up for questions, comments from the audience. Just as a reflection, I would like to come back. We've been focusing on technologies, but people's capacities and education is something we have not yet talked about, access to information and ability to use that information. But let's open up for questions, comments from the audience. What I would like to do is take several of you. Please don't be shy. We have microphones, and raise your hand so we have an idea where to go to. And please give us your name and your institution. And feel free to direct them to any of the panelists as you wish to, if you know exactly whom you want to address. And again, I remind you, try and focus as much as your comments as we can to help move forward this discourse on post-2015 and German development cooperation. I see a hand at the back. And let's start with the back and come forward. And there's a microphone coming to you. And please name an institution. Let's take about 4 or 5, if that's agreeable.
Ja, Stig Hansmann, Brot für die Welt.
Stig Hansmann from Bread for the World, the Protestant Development Service. I have a question about coherence, and I would like to address this to Dr. Schmitz, who's not here anymore, but perhaps also to the Director General of IFPRI. We heard quite a lot about the Right to Food Act in India, and my question to Dr. Schmitz would be how you use the WTO agreements or the WTO negotiations, because during the last negotiations there was also some discussion about the Right to Food Act in India. I think this is something that we all place very great hopes in, and India really had to defend this act very much in the negotiations. The question is whether this could be an approach that could be used by other countries, and I would like to know what can the German government do to make sure that such acts become a reality in other countries as well. And then I'm asking who would actually spell out to our policymakers that there is no political coherence. We have to think in bigger terms. We have to see the big picture. Otherwise, all of our discussions are superfluous, really.
There were several hands in this row, the gentleman with the black shirt, and then we'll come forward.
Thank you. My name is Wilfried Bommert, World Food Institute Berlin. Ich möchte gerne eine Frage.
I have a question to Professor Messner. You said what we can do in terms of our behavior. For example, not wasting food, not throwing that much food away, eating less meat. But what you did not mention were biofuels. Don't you think that biofuels could be something that we could reduce in order to reduce the use of land? And the second question, the federal government has come up with a program for the bioeconomy. It basically means that in the future, the resources of the industry can be won on arable land. Do you share the optimism of the federal government that this will be possible without having a negative effect on global food security?
Thomas Krucham, I'm a freelance author. I'd just like to address a question to IFPRI. In your report, you touched malnutrition a little bit, but you focused on eradication of hunger and undernutrition up to the year 2025. When I recently visited one of the countries very strongly affected by malnutrition, Bangladesh, I noticed that the experts there very strongly advocated not only modernization of agriculture, better access to food, but also one thing which Professor Messner stressed for our industrialized countries, behavioral change. In many countries which I visited, people don't know how to feed themselves properly. They would basically have the necessary assets, they would basically have the necessary resources, but they don't know that they have to diversify their food. And I wanted to ask IFPRI, what role does that play for you and for the strategies that you are developing with others? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought there was a hand next to you. Yes. Sandra? Oh, no, the gentleman next to her. Yeah.
Okay. Ralf Süthoff, I'm in Germany. I've got a question for Director Sheng and Fang. You highlighted the concept of resilience, which indeed I believe is a key concept to fight hunger or even beat it in due course. At the same time, often it's a buzzword and it's very hard to operationalize what might it mean in terms of drafting really food security programs for donors to make it a concept, how to decide where to go with resources. In which way would you think resilience is by now already a concept which can be operationalized? And what would be your guidance how to do that in concrete terms, how to bridge humanitarian assistance to development goals, how to bridge that, for example, we have to deal with 4 major emergencies these days, and there's a clear trade-off to the funding. For example, we can invest in hunger solutions in development programs. Is it more than a buzzword, and how can it be operationalized? That would be my key question.
Thank you. We take 2 more, and then we will come back. The gentleman there, and then the lady at the back.
Yes, Stefan Sieber from SALF. I very much liked it, how you discussed, and thank you very much for this. And I agree with all aspects what you raised. I have one question that came to me, because we coordinate one bigger project in Tanzania, and when I come up with this bottom-up approach, it's action research where we are. And what I certainly miss sometimes is because this is really broad and a lot of aspects we consider, to prioritize those aspects. And I think there's a need for this. And if I look at in the fields where we work, it is a lot with upscaling, because we have a lot of knowledge already that exists. And this upscaling aspect for me is to combat hunger, I think, the people, we have to reach the people on the field, and this upscaling aspect is one major issue I consider as very important, and of course well embedded in policy and all other aspects. But this is what I felt, and you mentioned, is this site-specific adaptation. Site-specific adaptation, because we need to act according to the needs of people, and this is very site-specific. And I think these 2 aspects maybe, I would be happy or grateful if you would answer those. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one goes to the lady at the back. Yes. And I'll come back and do another round.
Yeah, hello, my name is Connie from Veterinarians Without Borders, and I have maybe a more general question or to the IFPRI. And my question is, why aren't livestock policies addressed more in your report? As in many countries, food security is closely linked to animal production, be it smallholder or pastoralist production systems, especially in Eastern Africa and Western Africa. And as you mentioned, increasing meat consumption will lead to increased livestock production, being in competition with land. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So panelists, we have a number of different questions. I will take the prerogative to say address those that you can address. Some of them you may pick up and have more detailed discussion in the lunch break. But there's several issues, everything from India, right to food, WTO, human behavior, biofuels, bioeconomy, behavioral change in terms of helping people to understand better how to feed themselves better, resilience, upscaling or scaling up, and a key issue, and then livestock. And I give a heads up to Carlos Serre that I might come back to you, Carlos, for the livestock side. So just get ready for that. Why don't we begin with Schengen and work our way around this way?
Yeah. Okay, the Indian food security bill is not different from any other social protection scheme or plan, but it's much bigger in terms of magnitude, in terms of spending. It has been there for some time, so they wanted to make sure that they wanted to expand that. Yes, India actually really brought this issue to Bali for the WTO ministerial negotiation. So finally, the United States agreed that the food security clause should be part of the Bali negotiation results. I mean, on the one hand, I'm very sympathetic to India's position. That is, food security is the top priority of development. I very much support that. On the other hand, you have many ways in achieving food security, many ways. So simply just to give food to everybody, 60%, is not the best way to spend the money. It's not the best way to improve people's nutrition. So the problem of that program is it's not well targeted, it's inefficient, it does not have a strong link with nutrition, it will crowd out lots of productive investment. So I agree, food security is important, many ways to achieve it. The behavior change, yes, this is indeed a very, very important issue. Even when I was an infant, maybe I don't remember, my mother's knowledge about nutrition is very limited. She would sell nutritious food, like eggs, to the market and then buy 1 kilo of rice or wheat. And she thought that's probably the best food for a child. So we ate lots of rice soup, protein. She thinks it's nutritious. So why I say this is knowledge information will be critical for this woman to change their behavior. Even in Bangladesh, does this woman know the nutrition aspects of different food? So that's a very important one. And now IFPRI is doing some research on that to look at the behavior, the role of behavior in affecting people's nutrition, including over and undernutrition. Overnutrition, to a large extent, we also have to fix the price issues. So if you wanted to eat meat, if you wanted to eat unhealthy food, you have to pay the social cost, environmental cost, carbon emission cost, and also health cost. Because the whole society will bear the consequences of bad health by overeating. I think the global coherence policy indeed is very important. Do we have the right trade policy? Make sure that food and other agricultural products can be fairly, I say fairly, freely, transparently traded, including the environmental impact should be part of that story. And then some of the let's say, the reserves issues, the global reserve stocks issues. I mean, today we still have not worked together to set up a more efficient, effective strategic grain reserves. So some countries, emerging economies, have built large amount of stocks, India and China. So India actually quite interesting. They have very high stock. They want to use that stock for their public distribution for food security bill. To me, that's a huge waste. So can the countries work together to set up strategic reserves? Livestock, yes, we include livestock in agriculture. Livestock plays a huge role, particularly in improving people's nutrition. So IFPRI is leading one of the large CGI research programs called Linking Agriculture to Health and Nutrition. Agriculture includes livestock over there. In fact, Carlos, Sarah, and I, were one of the probably first, I don't know, it's the fathers or grandfathers of that program. So we initiated the setup of that program. So Carlos, you probably have more to say. I should also recognize another person here. Is it Bruce Campbell? Is it Bruce Campbell? Yeah. So he is a CGI director on climate change and food security. So climate smart agriculture is a very much an issue. CGI is working on it. So if you need more information on this program, again, Bruce can give you more information during lunch break.
Thank you, Schengen. Dirk, do you want to come in on the human behavior?
Right, I wanted to pick up 2 or 3 points. The first one was on bioenergy. Who asked that? I think we have to redirect our bioenergy policies. We should not use agricultural land for producing bioenergy. What we can use is the 2nd and 3rd generation of bioenergy production, which work with waste of agricultural production or forestry, and this is feasible. If you would do so, the potential of bioenergy based on waste of the 3rd and 2nd generation of bioenergy is still around 100 exajoule per year. This is more or less 20% of our current global energy production. So bioenergy might play a role. It might be an important driver of going towards renewable energies, but we should go for the 2nd and 3rd generation, and we should avoid losing agricultural land for bioenergy production. The second question was on bioeconomy and what is that about. In many countries we do have bioeconomy strategies now. In Germany too. We had a conference last week on that. I had a discussion with the chair of the bioenergy scientific advisory board of the government on bioenergy. And they define bioenergy as how we use biological resources. And the challenge is correctly defined, because we know that we are running into scarcity situations regarding many biological resources. No? So what looked very old-fashioned when we talked about industrialization and we talk about IT is very important, no? Using biological resources. So the question then is how to use those. And again, to use those in a sustainable way, and how to think about sustainable use of bioenergy of any type. This is a key challenge for all of us. And my major answer would be, and this came out of our conference last week, was that actually we have to close all types of cycles for non-renewable biological resources. No? And we got the data that in Europe currently we only recycle 10% of the non-renewable biological resources which we could recycle. So we are still at the beginning of building up circular economies, and we need to close these cycles during the next 2 to 3 decades, no? To avoid these kind of scarcity situations, which would then result in rising up prices, which would then result in difficult situations for poor people, of course. No? Last point, upscaling. Upscaling is very important. But I do have 3 perceptions in mind, or 3 situations in mind. The first one is I'm optimistic for most countries, actually, and you show the data. No? Many countries are making progress because many countries are having better institutional settings now. They are making progress in the field of poverty reduction and food security. Then we still I do not know the answer for the 30 most difficult countries on earth. No? So we do not even know how to stabilize these countries, how to bring violence levels down. No? And combining this then with food security, we need much more reflection on that. We avoid it a bit because it's so difficult. No? I mean, Somalia, Congo, all these kind of difficult countries, we need to focus on those, because if not, we will not reach the 2025 goal, which you mentioned. No? So this was my second. My third point is, and this has to do with climate change again, we do not have solutions nowhere for a 3 to 4 degrees plus world in terms of resilient agricultural production for 9 billion people becoming richer. No? We do not have these kind of solutions. So more research is needed there. And one last sentence, I'm not against technologies. No? I'm a big friend of productivity gains wherever possible. No? But we have to have in mind that there are other leverages where we need to focus on also, and I mentioned several of those. No?
Thank you very much. Tassilo, any responses?
We picked the same points, more or less, I think. On the biofuels and bioeconomy, biomass, first answer. I think what companies like the one I'm working for are really good is to optimize within a given framework. But problems arise once the framework is changed, maybe even in between the optimization process. So with biofuel discussion, a framework was set and incentives were set. And so I think I absolutely agree. So using waste for biofuels in the future, focusing on these second, third generation aspects, technologies. But we also need to make sure that the incentives that have been set are not taken against now the companies or farmers that adapted to these incentives and reacted to them. So that needs to make sure. But of course, clear that food production is always the priority over any other biofuel production. Then the biomass issue, we are also researching in this actively. But there again, there are mixed incentives. On the one hand side, we are pushed or motivated to do research in this way. And then on the other hand, we learn or see the expectations coming from society. So there again, one solution could be to focus on bio-waste, for example. And then I heard from several speakers here the behavioral pattern change or capacity building. Both pays into the same direction, the same argument. I think technology is not only, I mentioned it before, it's not only technology in itself. It means also teaching others how to use these technologies in a smart way. So capacity building. That's also part of the programs we are engaged in the German Food Partnership. But I tell you something, I have 2 children, and every day I try to set up the right incentives that lead maybe to a behavioral change. It is not easy, I can tell you. So yes, needed, but of course I could foresee it will take a bit of time until we see this change.
Thank you. Raphael, you have a number of things have been addressed. Pick up on the ones that you...
Yeah, but maybe one point again is the access to resources. You said we have enough resources worldwide to feed 9 billion people. And maybe we can also have bioeconomies as well, etc. But the access to all these resources is a great difficulty. And as I introduced at the beginning, Mr. Van, my question is, how can we regulate this access or make it better and have more equality in access to these different resources, which is quite difficult at the moment. And the FAO worked on a paper in this direction, and I'm always thinking, how can we manage to put it into reality and to manage that these available resources are used in an equal way. And especially if we move to bioeconomies, all bioeconomy papers state that food first and the right to food is primordial, etc. But there are no standards at all in this direction. So we do it the same way like with the biofuels. We first install bioeconomies and then afterwards we will think about the right to food. And for us, as a civil society organization, the right to food is not negotiable. It is first the right to food and then the bioeconomy. And we are not at the point where we can say the bioeconomy and bioenergy issues are safe, are food in this direction. Or maybe we could just have an answer to this issue on land tenure and how can we introduce that in such discussions of planetary boundaries. Is it a relevant aspect of the year 2013, which was a global asset to have this paper endorsed, or won't it be put into reality by the government?
Thank you very much. Schengen, did you want to
That's
react?
a question addressed to me. Yes, I must say the land, water are the most critical resources. Land and water are often linked. Without water, the land is not going to produce anything. Without land or your water will not produce anything. So the combination of water and land. So I would emphasize the rights to water and land combined. Yes, we must to make sure that the smallholders will continue to have access to these natural resources. The World Bank, IFPRI, FAO, and together with IFPRI support have introduced these voluntary guidelines of land practice. I think we must bring these 2 countries. It's not just voluntary. They must adopt this good practice to make sure that smallholders are going to benefit from any investment, including the investment from emerging economies, from oil-rich countries, and from Germany. I want to add one thing here. I don't know, Roger, whether this is our last sentence.
No, you
Okay.
still... You will have a chance for a last sentence.
All right.
No, you're welcome to say it.
Go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. Then before, can we pass the mic to Carlos? And as we do that, I wanted to make 3 remarks. What I took away from this discussion, and Dr. Schmitz is not here, but I know colleagues are here, the question of prioritization is a key one. Prioritization is a key one. Scaling up, key challenge. We are wonderful at pilots. We are incredibly, how the heck do we scale up? And it's not just multiplying it, but I think there's a whole science to that, and I'm not sure that we're paying enough attention. And the third one is we talked long-term. Nobody has talked health. and the health issues and people's health. We talked nutrition, but we have not talked health. And in terms of your planetary boundaries, Dirk, I think we have to put health on the table because that can make or break an economy. But Carlos, livestock.
Thanks. And the health is the right buzzword, I think, to give me the link. I think one of the key issues is we cannot address issues globally. Eating meat is bad. There's clearly very different levels. Small amounts of meat in diets in developing countries are key to provide micronutrients, minerals, iron, for example, etc. There's analysis showing how very small amounts improve the cognitive capacity of kids in school, etc. On the other hand, we all agree that too much meat is also bad. So the key point is that this has to be nuanced. I think the next point I would like to stress is several speakers have talked about sustainable intensification. If you look at the systems, really the combination of crops, trees, livestock, that's what gives you sustainability. And so a lot more attention needs to go into understanding these linkages. Livestock play a key role in marginal resources which cannot be used for cropping or in mixed systems where they do what we have said in general terms, cycling nutrients back into the system. That's what livestock are very good at. So I just would like to stress important nutritional dimensions, important livelihood dimensions. I mean, we do not consider the importance of pastoralists' income sources, and I would link it to a bigger, broader point you make here in the discussion, the biofuels as being deleterious to nutrition. We do not, in the discussion, raise a question of fiber, for example. We do grow cotton, we do grow a lot of other things. So in a way, I think the biofuels discussion has to be put into a broader income as a key dimension of food security, is having incomes. So livestock plays a similar role. It's a key source. We know that world is going to continue consuming livestock products, and we need to understand how to use those attributes in a smarter way. As we have been discussing with Bruce, livestock provides huge opportunities for mitigation, because if we just feed animals better, we can reduce the amount of CO2 and methane produced dramatically, etc. So my main point would be, don't forget livestock in these broader discussions. It's a key tool which the colleague has very appropriately raised. Thank you for giving me the chance.
Thank you very much. And Carlos Serra was a former Director General of the International Livestock Research Institute. Let me open up for another quick round of questions and comments. And I see 4 hands up. Microphones, please. Name and institution.
Good afternoon, Martin Merkel, Crop Science. Question to Schengen. You mentioned, I think in your last slide, that part of the solution must be a stronger involvement of the private sector. I was going to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit on that, and whether you could also mention some initiatives which from your perspective right now set kind of a benchmark, and to make it easier for you, I would like to name something outside of Germany, just to be politically on the safe side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was a hand just behind you. No, we give right now priority to those who haven't had a chance to speak. But there was a lady in this one. Maybe I missed it, sorry. I come back to you later, sir. But let me come here to Marlena.
Thank you. Marlene Diekmann, GIZ. I'd like to pick up one point that was made by Professor Messner, and that is the depletion of phosphate resources. That is a very serious problem, and one of the, usually they are called sister institutes of IFPRI, another institute in this international network of agricultural research, namely the International Water Management Institute, IMI, is doing research on how to recycle phosphate from water. They are pretty much at the beginning, and what's needed is really more funding for this very important kind of work. And because this is not yet in the heads of donors, the funding is just not forthcoming. Mm-hmm. And since I mentioned IMI, Schengen, forgive me for doing a little advertisement for another institute. IMI is also doing a lot of very interesting research on wastewater recycling, control of waterborne diseases, and so on. So it's one of the not so well-known institute, but it's doing very fine research.
Thank you very much. There were hands in that part of the room. Did I miss them? There's a gentleman behind you. I would have sworn I saw 4 or 5. Yes, okay.
Well, I have Frank Begemann, Federal Office for Agriculture and Food. My question is, we heard a lot about rural development and the focus on the rural poor. My question is on urbanization. What is really the role of urbanization? Now we have reached a level of 50%, basically, of the global population living in cities, in mega cities even. And do we have the right answers to exactly these people, these communities living there? And maybe for these, we may need other production scenarios. So we know of, for instance, story buildings for horticulture production and so forth. My question to Schengen is really, would you see opportunities through these kind of production scenarios for these parts of the population, or is this completely out of your picture? Thank you.
Okay, there's a gentleman at the back.
Yeah, thank you. Hans Bisalski, Food Security Center, Hohenheim. I have a question to Sheng and also to the Tassilo. You mentioned that stunting is one of the major goals you might reduce, and you will reduce, and that stunting has a major impact on productivity. And according to scientific data and a recent report of the FAO, the best correlation between stunting and diet is the amount of starchy food in the diet. That means a low diet diversity. And my question is, are there any ideas how to improve diet diversity on the production level and at least on the consumer level?
Okay. And the gentleman who had asked the bioeconomy question, you had your hand up also? Oh, wait, there's a microphone coming. Yeah. Okay. And there is a question over there also, back to you. Yes, go ahead. And as you do that one thing, this is a moment, if any of you want to make some suggestions on prioritization, you know, at the time when this German Development Corporation is going to put €1 billion, if I hear. Any suggestions you have, 1-minute suggestions for Dr. Preuss and other colleagues to hear? I'm sure they will welcome them. We have heard so many things from you. Where would you want to prioritize? If any of you have suggestions there, I'll come to you after we take this gentleman and the gentleman at the back.
Just a very short question. I was asking myself all the time for the right funding mechanism. In terms of, we have a CG center, we have also NGOs, we have action research. Where do you see in the future that you say, well, we need to also to improve the funding mechanism to a certain extent to involve maybe others in terms of action research? I would love to hear maybe your thoughts about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the gentleman at the back, all the way at the back.
Johannes Rücker, stellvertretender
Johannes Rücker, deputy head of the Catholic movement, representing also farmers, people working in rural areas. And I'm happy that I have the opportunity to ask in German. About 3 weeks ago in Germany, we had the World Conference of FIMAG. That's the International Catholic Organization of the Land Movement. We had representatives from Europe, South America, and Africa. And during our conversations, there were 2 topics that we focused on, at least from the point of view of the delegates from the poorer countries. First, the promotion of family farming. We have the year of family farming, as a matter of fact. And then another thing that gave rise to concern for many of the delegates was the question, what can be done about land grabbing? And this is exactly my question to you. These 2 topics, family farming and land grabbing, do they play a role for your work on the post-2015 agenda.
Comment on priorities. This is the moment before I come to the panel. And if not, I'm sure you can send a quick email afterwards. Okay, guys? Okay. I will come to the panel then, and I will work backwards this way, from Raphael to Schengen. And this is a moment I will also ask you. This is your, after addressing any questions you want to, this is your 1 minute final takeaway message you want to leave with the audience. So, Raphael, several questions on the table.
First of all, maybe the question of urbanization. Yes, of course, we should have a look at the urbanization issues and find some ways to combine rural development with food security in urban areas and to have a closer look to the peri-urban areas. I think that's an important issue we didn't discuss on the panel. What I take with me at home from this panel is that nobody said something against a hunger goal for 2025. So we all agree here in this room that we can ensure food and nutrition security by 2025, and that's the best thing of this report, is that now we have the human rights obligation to reach this goal. I think that's a very important thing we discussed today. The other main issue is that we need more coherent policies that contribute to an enabling environment for site-specific development in rural area with site-specific agriculture, but with a special look on urban areas as well. And we need also enabling environment for a sustainable development in developed countries, in rich countries, in terms of lifestyles and equity. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. 3 very short, sharp messages. Tassilo?
I hope I can live up to that. First of all, land grabbing. I think it's not black or white. From an efficiency point of view, of course, building up larger farms might also contributing to overcome poverty and also help to develop those countries. But of course, it can't be that those activities are conflicting to local development goals. That's also clear. But I just want to find you want to shift your focus to the fact that it's not only black and white, that it's not only black or white, but it's a complex situation. What I take away from this discussion is that we carefully need to listen case by case what is needed locally. There are several ways, several technologies. I just want to highlight or raise your attention to a report that was done by IFPRI on how technologies can contribute to food security just recently. But it depends on the local situation, what is needed there. And then also what partners can help to contribute to achieve the goals there. And that's it. Basically.
Thank you very much. Also very nice, sharp and focused. Thank you. Dirk, several questions there too.
Yes, 2 questions and 1 takeaway issue. The first question was on urbanization, which I find very important because I think the whole scenario will change from any angle you take the question. Because food and production patterns will change in cities for good and bad. No? For the African continent, this means that new local markets are growing in these cities, and this is an opportunity for smallholders also. No? On the other hand side, urbanization, of course, is linked to growing middle classes and upper classes in these cities, so their food patterns and the way they manage their food waste is very important for food security globally. No? And in 2050, 80% of global population will live in cities. So cities and how we use land is absolutely key from any angle. We need to think more about that. The second point which I wanted to pick up very briefly is the land grabbing issue. No? So we need to differentiate, of course, investments in land, which is fine, and land grabbing, which implies that people with needs do not have access to their own land locally. So it is about rules for access to land. And we need international standards for that. I would like to see an international regime for that, actually. No? An international regime, international rules for that, international law for that, because this is a human right. No? Investments in agriculture are fine to push agricultural productivity, but access to land for local communities is something which we should not debate on. We should make these types of rights clear. My last point, and these have been the questions, my last point in terms of what I would like to re-emphasize. For me, the phosphor issue is very critical and important because this is something where we do not have a solution for. And research in this field is therefore very important. In Germany, in Bremerhaven, we are building up currently a cluster doing research from different disciplines on the phosphor question, phosphor and food and food security questions. So not much more research is needed in terms of phosphor. And my second takeaway point, which I wanted to emphasize, is we need a balance of technological innovations, and I agree with everything what has been said, and social innovations. And we should not argue that we as human beings are not able to put social innovations forward. I don't agree on that. I also have a son. I know that putting the right incentives in place is very difficult. My son is 16 years old, you know. So I understand your point. But we as human beings, we can change behavior, of course. No? I mean, we have invented democracy, human rights. No? We should be able to avoid 30% of food waste. This is a scandal. No? In a situation of 1 billion people suffering hunger and 30% of food waste in our households, this is a scandal. And we should talk about that also in terms of changing it.
Thank you very much. Again, super sharp focused. Schengen, there were a number of questions addressed to you.
Yeah, 3 brief points to respond to the question, then final takeaway message. Number 1, I very much support the German government's 4 objectives, particularly the last one, to improve the governance, human rights, and the peace. That relates to your question. Yeah. What happened to these 20 countries where they are in conflicts? I'm afraid in the future, the poor and hungry, malnutrition people will be concentrated in these conflict countries. Yeah. We need to work with broader international community, not just food and agriculture community, to tackle that problem. That's number 1 point. Second point is the private sector. Private sector has a huge role in doing this. So that's why I asked Paul Pullman, the CEO of the Unilever, to co-author a paper with me. And he's equally committed to cut hunger, malnutrition by 2025, by the way. So the private sector is very much committed. So their practices to using the value chain, their investment, their technology for achieving this goal. Number 3 comment is about the stunting. Yes, indeed, the stunting comes from what you eat, not just how much you eat. So the combination of starch, of vegetables, fruits, meat, all this balanced diet will help to reduce the stunting. So it's not just the amount of food. Then my takeaway message, that probably will make Raju very happy, that resilience will be so critical for achieving this 2025 goal. We cannot afford the people to go to hungry today and out of hungry tomorrow. So this fluctuation is a very much essence of building resilience to make sure that people will have constant access to food and nutrition, not only by 2025, but also by 2100, whatever, forever. So resilience is very critical in doing that. How do we operationalize it? Technology, newer technology should not just increase the yield, but also increase its stability. Under any condition, weather condition, they should be able to produce good food. The newer technology should also help to enhance the nutrition. Right? The nutrition is a very, very big component of that. Then donors, you are also asking about the funding mechanism. Social protection has to link to long-term development. I think I forgot to respond to your question. WFP's food relief has to link to long-term development. I think WFP is already doing that. Keep doing good work on that. Then long-term growth. we also have lots of development agencies, national agencies, purely focused on growth. But let's not forget about the fluctuations. Certain growth, you can maximize your growth for 10 years, but the fluctuation is very big along these years. We wanted to make sure that the not only long-term growth, but also very small variations across different time, including overall economic growth, access to income, and food and nutrition. I think if we all work together, we can all achieve cutting hunger and malnutrition by 2025. I very much like what you said. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, I'm sure you'll agree with me. We had a super set of panelists. They really informed us, engaged us, made us think, hopefully come back to them. I'd like to turn over now to Dr. Preuss for the closing remarks. We will stay here.
Just in case if I didn't.